The arrest of independent journalist Don Lemon, who was covering an anti-ICE protest in Minneapolis at a church, has raised questions over what is protected under the First Amendment. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche argues Lemon was violating the right to freely practice religion when he entered the church. But others say his arrest was infringing on the freedom of the press. On Jimmy Kimmel Live last night, the former CNN anchor insisted he was doing his job and claimed the Trump administration was trying to instill fear.
I'm not a protester. I went there to be a journalist. I went there to chronicle and document and record what was happening. I was following that one group around, and so that's what I did. I reported on them. They want to embarrass you. They want to intimidate you. They want to instill fear.
Let's bring in Jed Rubenfeld to discuss this. He's a professor at Yale Law School and a columnist for the Free Press. And we should note the Free Press and CBS News have the same parent company, Paramount Skydance. Jed, good morning. You write in your column that it's actually not clear in such a case which way the First Amendment values cut. Help our viewers understand why that is, because Don Lemon is defending himself by saying he has a First Amendment right to practice as a journalist, but the charges being brought against him are also part of the First Amendment. So break that down for us.
Yeah, it's an unusual case that way. You got people who are, saying they're exercising their First Amendment rights of protest, but they're doing it to, disrupt other people who are trying to exercise their First Amendment freedoms of religious worship. So it's kind of like a clash between First Amendment interests. That's an unusual case. And, you can't say that the First Amendment cuts clearly and cleanly one way or the other. You got First Amendment interests on both sides.
And what your article clearly shows is the limits on any rights that people have. The first judge, though, to review this case specifically didn't feel there was enough probable cause to bring charges. The administration appealed that, and then we saw the arrest of Don Lemon last week. But how does the fact that the first judge to look at the facts didn't feel that there was enough there, how does that change the perception of what's happening in this case?
If I'm Lemon's lawyers, I'm going to hammer on that fact, but it doesn't really make much of a difference legally speaking at all. What happened was after a magistrate judge, that's the lowest kind of federal judge, said, no, there's no probable cause for Lemon here. The government went to a grand jury. That's 23 people. And the grand jury said, yeah, there is probable cause. And by the way, an appellate judge looking at that magistrate's ruling, an appellate judge, the only appellate judge to, come in on this, said, yeah, there is probable cause. So the initial denial, it doesn't make much of a difference, legally speaking.
And for our viewers, I mean, this was all, or some of this was streamed live. There's likely footage people can look at. Lemon met with some of the protesters ahead of time and then followed with them, effectively embedded with them as they went into this church. And your article asks all sorts of questions. How much did he know? Did he know that a crime may have been being planned? But you also write that the protesters, when they arrived at the church, didn't necessarily violate anyone's right to freely exercise religion. Can you explain that piece of this?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you real quickly why Lemon is, in some trouble legally and, why he might be able to beat these charges. He's in trouble because he meets with the protesters in advance. Okay, he meets with them in advance. He knows what they're doing. He knows where they're going to do it. He knows when they're going to do it. He actually takes steps to help them achieve what they're doing. He keeps secret the facts. And because he's doing all that, that changes his picture maybe from a reporter to, from a legal perspective to co-conspirator. Like I tell my students, imagine that a reporter embedded with people who were planning a murder and, knew what they were doing and turned off the camera when the identity might be revealed. You don't have a journalistic immunity if you're embedding with people who are planning a crime. But were they planning a crime? That's the real question. The federal charges that Lemon is up against and the other protesters, they're narrow, this federal crime. The folks in that church had to have obstructed entry and exit from the church. They have to have physically obstructed people from getting in, getting out in order to be guilty under these federal charges. Now, some of the protesters may have done that. It looks like some of the evidence suggests, they blocked the stairs. They weren't letting the grown-ups take their kids out. But did Lemon know any of that? Did he know that they were going to obstruct as opposed to just go inside. But by the way, going inside the church, that might be a trespass under state law, but the federal charges require obstruction. Did Lemon know that? Did he know they were going to do that? If he didn't know that that's what was going on or that they were planning that, I think he has a good shot at beating these charges.
Well, Jed Rubenfeld, great for you to hone in on the key questions at play here in this case that we'll all keep watching closely. We really appreciate you joining us today. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.